posted. Analysts say they think he's about 40 years old, born in Samarra, Iraq, about 80 miles north of Baghdad. If you're up on biblical history at all, you've heard of that place. When he was younger, he reportedly often led prayers at a local mosque. Apparently, he was also a very good soccer player. Somebody who claims he knew him at the time called him the Lionel Messi of their team. Anyway, here he is again, al-Baghdadi. He took a lot of heat after that sermon for what appears to be a Rolex on his wrist. See right there? A lot of people were yelling about that. Strange sort of thing for the head of a group violently fighting the ways of the Western world, but there you have it. Analysts say al-Baghdadi has some 8,000 militant fighters under his control at the moment. He reportedly wears a mask when addressing his commanders, earning him the nickname the Invisible Sheikh. In the year 2005, American forces in Iraq captured him, and he spent the next 4 years as an American prisoner. He went free after that, while analysts say he may have met with al-Qaeda fighters at the time. Then he emerged as the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq. And in 2011, the United States officially labeled him a terrorist and put a $10 million bounty on his head. Some analysts say they consider him even more dangerous than Osama bin Laden himself. Some Republicans say that President Obama should not rule out putting American boots on the ground in Iraq to keep the Islamic State from spreading. Now, keep in mind, there is a Shia-Sunni war that's been going on longer than the United States has existed. And if we put boots on the ground in this conflict, we are taking one side against the other. And if you think that whole part of the world won't notice it, you are badly misinformed. Just last night, President Obama said there is, quote, no American military solution to the crisis in Iraq, which began, obviously, with the crisis of our war in Iraq. Without that, we wouldn't be here. Let's bring in Michael O'Hanlon, a senior fellow and research analyst for the foreign policy programs at the Brookings Institution. Michael, it's nice to see you. Thank you.
Hey, Shepard, good to see you.
That we all know it began with our war in Iraq does not help us at all with today's matter. So let's talk about today and what the best options might be. You can't just let people by the tens of thousands die on a mountain. You got to do what you can if you can do it, but how far does it go?
Well, great question, and different parts of the problem could have different solutions. I hope that the immediate threat to that group of individuals, that minority, will be at least largely mitigated by this action, and I hope that a limited use of air power, these bombs we've been dropping a little bit more to the east, will help the Kurds protect themselves in their own autonomous region. I think that'll probably work because the Kurds have pretty decent ground forces, as you know, the Peshmerga. They don't have a lot of air power, but we're providing that. And if there's a big movement of this ISIS group or ISIL group eastward, I think we can help stymie that and hit their artillery as we apparently have today. Those are the easier parts of the problem. The harder part is how do you ultimately help the Iraqi army take back northern and western Iraq writ large, these big cities like Mosul and Fallujah, from the ISIL group, which I think has to be our longer-term goal, and that's where it gets controversial.
Not only controversial, but, I mean, how in the world can you do that? We've trained them for a decade. We spent like $1 trillion on it, and now the equipment that we gave them, the up-armored equipment that we gave them by the pieces by the hundreds, that's the reason that the Peshmerga can't stand up to them, because they now have our equipment. I mean, why would the Iraqi army do now what it wouldn't do 6 months ago?
I think you have to start, as the Obama administration recognizes, with a new government in Baghdad. You need a replacement for Maliki. If we don't get that, I'm not sure we should consider anything much more than what we're doing now. But if you were to get that, I would personally want to consider several options. And if you did all of them, it could add up to 5,000 U.S. troops. One of them is substantially more air power. A second would be some commandos to help the Iraqi special forces with raids. And a third would be, and this is the hardest part, some advisory units in the field with some of the Iraqi forces that need to be rebuilt, need to get their confidence back. In some cases, they have too many bad guys, too many potential insider attackers of our forces for us to want to put our own people in these units. But there may be cases where we can really give them a shot in the arm, give them a boost, help them restore their momentum and their competence by putting a small team out in the field with them. I think we've got to consider those sorts of things if there's a new leader of Iraq in the near future.
Doesn't history tell us that if we do that, we'll have to be there forever, and and when we leave, whenever that is, 30, 40 years from now, whenever it is, happens again?
I don't know if history tells us that, Shepard. It also tells us that a lot of these countries go through periods of long stability. You know, look at Jordan, for example. And I think what you're seeing is a place where, yes, you've had a lot of tension, but in some sense, the tension was rekindled by all the violence of the last 10 years. I don't want to make too much of the Pottery Barn rule that, you know, we broke it and therefore we got to help fix it. But the fact that we broke it in 2003 is to some extent what unleashed all these other forces. And it also means that there are ways to put a lid back on. You need to have a better leader than Saddam Hussein, but he did have a lid on this stuff. And, you know, we've got to help work with the Iraqis in limited ways if they can show us a capacity to build a government of national unity. I think you and I are in agreement. Until that point, we certainly shouldn't do anything. But if we can get to that point, I think we've got to see if we can't help defeat this threat. This is a big threat. I'm not trying to sound like a big nation builder here. This is a big threat to the United States, this ISIL group, and we can't just wash our hands of the situation even if we want to.
Can you remember a more dire time?
Not a more complex time. But I'd still take today's problems over the 1940s, 50s, or 60s.
Yeah.
I still think the world was more dangerous then. For one thing, we have most of the moderate Islamic world with us, not against us. Most of the world recognizes that these kinds of groups like ISIL need to be defeated. And in fact, it's Muslims who are their victims more often than anybody else, despite what's happening on the mountain today, despite what's happened here on 9/11. Muslims are generally with us in wanting to win this fight. And so that's why I'm still hopeful. I think most of the world is united here, but we've just got to keep at it.
Michael O'Hanlon, great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shepard.
Continuing coverage of the crisis, United States military operation there. Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday, with us from Washington to talk context and perspective, the politics of all of this, the life and death situation that's ahead of us, with tens of thousands of persecuted minorities, including Christians, in a world of trouble.